And education director at the Cable Natural History Museum up in Cable, Wisconsin. This is a picture of our beautiful building, and we are supported by memberships and donations from people just like you. So we aren't funded by the state or the town or anything like that. And we are one of only 3% of museums across the nation that are accredited. And so we are accredited by the American Alliance of Museums, and it means that they actually, have us do our due diligence and write reports and make sure that we're doing everything just right, best practices. So we're really proud of that. We're also really proud of the fact that we build our own exhibits every year on an island. And so this is on an island in Lake Owen up by me, and it's a really nice little low reef. I think it's probably 10 feet in diameter, and then it drops off to fairly deep water. So that was ideal nesting habitat until the lake rose just a few inches, and then all of a sudden that nest was flooded out for a while. But you can see it's not much of a nest. So on a territory, the male chooses the nest site, and then the female builds the nest. And so she'll basically sit down where he tells her to and start pulling plants around here to basically just create a bumper. And that's it. That's the nest. It's just this mound of vegetation so that the eggs don't roll away. And it's got to be pretty close to the water because loons are terrible on land. Their legs are really far back on their body, which gives them a lot of power to swim really fast, but it's really bad balance for walking. And so they basically scoot themselves up onto land, and we actually got to watch the changing of the guard on this nest. And so that loon was able to stand up just long enough to spin the eggs, to turn the eggs, because otherwise the yolk will stick to the shell and they won't develop properly. And the parents take turns like that. And then they also need to be able to escape quickly. So if there's an eagle attacking, their best escape is to dive off into deep water. And so they have to have their nest pretty close to the edge. And on an island is ideal, but of course not every lake has cute little islands like this. So sometimes they're on the mainland as well. Yeah.
How old are the babies when they learn to dive, or how do they learn to dive? How far down do they go?
Yeah, so the chicks can dive pretty much as soon as they hit the water. So, it takes about 26 days to hatch, and then about 24 hours to dry out. And then there are these little fluff balls, right? And the chicks can go underwater immediately, but then they just pop right back up again, right? So they kind of bob like corks. And over time, they'll just dive more and longer. But they do get cold in their fluffy little chick feathers, and so that's one reason that they ride on mom and dad's backs. It's to keep them out of the cold water, and also to keep them away from the hungry mouths of the northern pike and the muskies and the snapping turtles and everything. And so I think diving is partly innate, probably partly instinctive, and then also watching mom and dad, right? Because mom and dad are diving constantly to bring up little insects and fish for them, and so they just learn everything by watching mom and dad. And you can see the chicks stick their face in the water, the behavior called peering, which is basically like snorkeling for a loon. So they're looking past the surface layer. And so the chicks are watching mom and dad dive and hunt from the very beginning, too. Monkey see, monkey do. Yeah.
You said they have a different call when there's an eagle. Do you have an example of that?
I don't have an example of that. I've never been able to find one that I could finagle off the internet or whatever, but it's a whale that tends to have kind of 3 notes, and then it just has a higher intensity that even we can understand. Yeah. And when an adult does do the eagle alarm call, the chicks will just dive instinctively. And when they're young, they can't dive for very long. They'll pop right back up, but that is their defense, is that they dive to get away from the eagle. Yeah.
Another experience on Labor Day weekend. We were up at the cabin, and our grandson was on the dock fishing. Eagle, loudest
eagles are the only predator of adult loons on their breeding territory. So eagles will take even an adult loon. Adult loons have also been known to fight off and even kill and injure the eagles occasionally, so they're not defenseless. But unfortunately, eagles can even take an adult. And so the recovery of eagles under the Endangered Species Act was amazing, but maybe they went a little too far. Yeah.
Their parents feed the chicks on the water.
Yeah, yep, so the chicks take a long time to actually learn to hunt for themselves, although by the time that they are 8 weeks old, they have those juvenile feathers in that are kind of smooth and brown, and by that point, a chick might be able to survive by themselves if the parents were killed or something. But the parents have to hand feed, beak feed the chicks from the very start. And what's kind of crazy about loons is that they can't chew and they can't tear their food into smaller pieces. If you think about something like an eagle, they're catching a big fish, but they're not swallowing it whole. That's why they have their talons and their hooked beak to actually tear their food into bite-sized pieces. But loons can't do any of that. They have to get something that is just the right size to swallow whole. And so their first baby food is actually like dragonfly nymphs and other aquatic insects that are just the right size. But I have seen some pretty small chicks get handed pretty big minnows and just about topple over trying to choke it down. But they managed it, man. They are motivated for eating. And just the last week in September, I was up in the Boundary Waters on this amazing lake, on Paulson Lake. It's at the top of the watershed. It is the bluest water you have ever seen in Minnesota. And, most of our water around here even is brown, right? So this is clear blue water. And this adult loon had a pretty big lake trout and just couldn't choke it down. If they catch a big fish deep down, they may bring it to the surface and then try and kind of toss it around and get it oriented so that the head goes first. They really can't swallow a fish backwards because of those fins. So I have also seen on Lake Owen them choke down a pretty big walleye. So they can do it, and their neck kind of stretches a little bit. And what's also kind of fun, so they have super intense stomach acid, and they have a gizzard too, right? That muscular stomach. So they're picking up little pebbles to help grind up the fish. So if they eat a fish that is too long for the alimentary tract, they'll just hang out with that bulge in their throat until the head digests and dissolves and it slides down. Kingfishers do the same thing. Most of the time, they're focusing on little perch that are much easier to swallow. Perch are just about the perfect fish for a loon to swallow. Now, the thing about their stomach and their gizzard is that lead sinkers look like the perfect gizzard stone. And a loon's stomach can actually digest a fish hook, no problem.
Whoa.
However, it can also digest a lead sinker, which of course leads to lead poisoning, and that's really bad. So if you care about loons, the two best things you can do to prevent their deaths, their unnatural deaths, are get the lead out, so stop using lead sinkers, and then slow down in your motorboat, because quite a few loons every summer get killed by blunt force trauma from boat propellers, which is just not necessary. So really horrific ways to die. Yeah.
We have eggs that are laid on the shore, and then the black flies come and drives the mother or father off the nest, and then the eggs never hatch.
No.
Is there any repellent? Is there any suggestions on how to...
I mean, there's not even a repellent that works for us for black flies, right? No, they're just evil incarnate, those little guys. So there is a species of black fly who is focused on loons, who is particularly attracted to the scent of the preen oil on the loon. And so it's not the same black fly that attacks us, but they do tend to be numerous in the same spring that our black flies are bad too. And it's worse in winters where spring is really abrupt, right? Where winter is really long and then all of a sudden spring happens in like 2 days. And then all the black flies hatch at once, and it's right when the loons also finally have enough warm weather to lay their eggs. So 2014, the polar vortex year, that was a really bad year for black flies. This year though wasn't bad. Now the good thing about black flies is that if the loons do have to dive off their nest and then the eggs fail, just usually because they get cold, sometimes predators, but also cold, the loons can re-nest. And by the time they get around to laying another egg, the black flies have usually died off enough that they can handle the attack.
So should we take the eggs off the nest then? When you know
No, that's illegal.
that?
Yeah, don't mess with loon eggs. Even if you think they're failed, you can't mess with them just because you wouldn't be sure, right?
Let Mother Nature,
Let Mother Nature take her
so
course.
they'll re-nest then?
They will often re-nest. Yep, there's a certain window, whereas if they know the nest fails within the first like 2/3 of the incubation period, they can nest again. And sometimes the female will only have enough energy for 1 egg instead of 2. And if the chicks hatch, then they're done. Their hormones have changed and they can't re-nest. But there's a lot of second nesting attempts. And so this year, a lot of the first nesting attempts succeeded, and that's when you get chicks in late June. But then when those fail, oftentimes, we had chicks that were born after the 4th of July this year, which is really late, but they were still doing well the last we saw of them. So yeah, second nesting attempts are okay.
Do they do it on the same platform or do they move?
They'll usually do it on the same nest.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
I notice that chicks sometimes are on the back of their parents. How do they get up on their back?
Oh, it's so fun. I don't have a video, but so the parent will open up their wing a little bit and the chick can climb up right underneath their wing. Yeah, yep. There's some good videos online. With the advent of like everybody's digital cameras and Instagram reels and everything, the amount of amazing loon footage out there is just incredible right now. But yeah, I wondered that for a long time too, until I found a video. So they're crawling up under the wing, and they can only fit on their parents' back for the first 2 to 3 weeks of life, and then they're too big. And this June, I was able to see some chicks who were clearly just on the edge of not being able to fit. They were just like, overhanging the back and looking really awkward and stuff. But they weren't quite ready to give up, like sitting on mom's lap kind of thing. So it was really sweet, actually. Yeah.
I said they're very territorial. When they fly back, do they head back to the same lake they left? Or just find something good and try to be the first one?
Yeah. So they will come back to, if they held a territory over the summer, they will be back the next spring to try and hold that territory again. And they have some advantage over other loons, having already established that territory. And even though they don't defend a territory in winter, they are also going back to about the same place in the winter as well. So on Lake Jocassee in South Carolina, where I watched the loons in March, there are just a few banded loons where they can know that it's the same individual year after year, and they come back to the same bay on that lake every single year. So loons are really creatures of habit. And the males, they take 3 to 4 years to mature. So they'll fly south as juveniles, and then they won't come back north for 3 to 4 years until they are sexually mature and ready to breed. And they actually stay brown that whole time. They're molting their feathers once a year, but they stay brown until they molt into their black and white breeding plumage for the first time, and then they head north. And the males tend to come back to within 15 miles of their natal territory, and females within 30 miles of their natal territory. And they also try and nest. They try and win a territory on the same type of lake that they were born on. So a seepage lake or a flowage lake, they're wanting that same type of habitat and water quality that they grew up with and that they know. And sometimes they will come back to their exact natal territory if their parents aren't still holding on to that. Yeah.
So is it true they mate for life and What's their, how old do they normally?
Yeah, good questions. So loons could mate for life if both members of the pair continue to win that territory and not be defeated. But they are more loyal to the territory than to each other. So lots of territorial battles. If a male comes in and fights and wins, the female will stay with that new, stronger male on the territory. Same with the females. So in some cases, a pair has been really strong and has been able to hold on to the same territory for years and years and years. But it's not the same as like swans, where they actually have that specific bond year-round. Loons do create a pair bond over the summer, but they don't migrate together. They don't overwinter together. They aren't really bonded outside of that territory. Age-wise, let's see, when I started this, the oldest male was 28 and the oldest female was 34. And I think that she's actually close to 40 now. She's still alive, and she's hatched over 50 chicks. Yeah, and you know, it was only the late 80s when they figured out how to band loons, and then we could really increase the amount of data we're getting and know what individuals are doing. And so since then, we've also discovered that 25% of loons hatch 50% of the chicks, because some loons are just better parents than others. You know, they're just, and it's not even like, it's because some of them are just more attentive, more dedicated, more willing to sit with the black flies and just hunker down and wait it out. You know, they just need less personal time in the summer, so they're more available to feed minnows and stuff like that too. So lots of different reasons, and I've had people tell me, you know, they've had a nest on their lake for 5 years, never had any successful chicks, and the parents kind of were not very attentive, and then finally a new pair won that territory, and suddenly they start having chicks because those parents are just that much more attentive. Yeah.
Do you know, like, on average, how many acres are in a territory?
So what I've heard, I think that I'm terrible with numbers, but I think 35 acres is the minimum. But it also depends on the amount of fish, right? So a family of 4 loons, 2 parents, 2 chicks, will eat about a literal ton of fish over the course of a summer. And the other main requirement is that because of their territorialness, they can't see another family of loons from their territory. And so if you have a perfectly round lake, almost no matter how big it is, you can only have one set of loons, right? But I live on Lake Namakagon, which is just the windiest, most convoluted lake. Lots of bays, lots of islands, and we've had at least 8 nesting attempts on that lake in a year. So plenty of little hidey holes for them in that one. Yeah.
So if they go down to the ocean, how do they handle the salt water versus the fresh water?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, they're amazing. So if you've ever learned about salmon, who are anadromous, who go from freshwater to saltwater, when I lived in California, I got to teach about them for the first time. And it was like, oh, these are amazing. But they have to spend several weeks in the estuary, in the brackish water, getting used to the difference in salinity and everything. Loons, they land on the ocean and they're good because they have a little gland up at the base of their beak that filters salt out of their blood. And it kind of like shrinks to almost nothing in the breeding season when they're up here on freshwater, but then it revs right back up in the winter just as soon as they land on salt water. And so it's actually, I think it's above their beak, and then there's a little tube and it goes out the little holes in their beak or right below it or something. And so loons are actually excreting this like concentrated salt goop all winter long, which of course just makes me think of like a snotty kid, right? so loons have a runny nose all winter long. And then, So they're doing some really interesting behavioral studies on the loons that are wintering on freshwater, Lake Jocassee, South Carolina, and also out on the ocean to see if maybe wintering on freshwater gives them an advantage because they don't have to run this kind of expensive organ to filter out the salt. And they've only got a few years of data, but they're just starting to see that loons do seem to spend, a few percentage points less time feeding on freshwater in the winter than when they're on saltwater in the winter. So then they have more time for social interaction, for preening and keeping their feathers nice, and more energy for molting. So really interesting start of the research there. Good question.
Do they have predators in the winter?
So the one predator I've heard about in the winter is dog sharks. And juvenile dog sharks are also known to hang out in this one part of the Gulf that has a lot of songbirds migrating over it. And so when exhausted songbirds tumble into the ocean, the dog sharks are there to eat them. But also supposedly dog sharks might snatch a loon in the winter. Yeah, well, if you think about the reasons that they are making their calls when they're up here, none of those reasons exist down there. So up here, they're wailing to talk to their mate or talk to the neighbors on other territories, and so they don't hang out with their mate on the ocean, and they don't really have the same relationships with their neighbors on the ocean because they're not on territories. And they're not flying, they're actually flightless over the winter because they're molting their flight feathers, and so they're not doing the tremolo. I would guess that if you really freaked one out, you might be able to get a tremolo out of a wintering loon too on the alarm call. And then of course the yodel is their territorial defense, and they don't defend territories in the winter, so there's no reason for them to call. I think that they do, I have heard them hoot on their wintering grounds. So that is something they will do, yeah. We also have the loon skull with their big beak, so that is their business end, right? And also for grabbing fish. Do you all know mergansers on your lake? Sawbill is their other name. So mergansers are also a fish-eating bird, and they have a serrated beak to help grab onto those fish. Loons don't have that. They evolved before serrated beaks came into existence, and so they ended up with just really strong jaw muscles in order to clamp onto the fish. And then my other favorite thing about their skull is that their spinal cord comes out in the back here. And so when they are swimming flat out and looking forward, their head and their body are all in alignment. If you think about you and trying to look at where you're going while you're swimming, you end up with a crick in your neck. So loons are really built for swimming. And their feet are another big part of that. So a loon's foot is the same dimensions as a wolf's paw. So really a huge surface area. Their lower leg is really skinny and flattened like a canoe paddle to slice through the water. And then their muscles are really concentrated on their upper thigh, so pretty well connected to their body. And that keeps them more aerodynamic. Another part of that is that the small size of their wings is so that when they fold their wings against their body, the tips don't extend beyond their body and create drag. So that's one of the limits of their wings. And they're really stiff. Let's see if you can hear it. And you can hear them flying too. So the dark pigment in their feathers actually makes them more stiff and durable. And then the stiff feathers help them compress air out of their feathers and out of their bodies so that they can dive more efficiently. So they can, if they want to float higher in the water, they can fluff up and inhale. If they want to float lower in the water, they can compress the feathers and exhale because they're basically neutral buoyancy with water. So a little bit up or down can really change it. And so if they're stressed out, they'll often sink lower in submarine, and also if there's a big storm and there's lots of waves or chop out there, they'll tend to sink lower. Bye.